week has been filled with images and stories of Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. And to read this scripture that talks about there will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. One can't help, I can't help, but to think about end times and to think about these traumas that are talked about in Scripture, the apocalypse, the end times that lead into a whole new heaven and new earth, like we spoke about in the prophet Isaiah. So I'd like for us to just take a moment and get into feeling the trauma of what this apocalypse is talking about, what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about the destruction of the temple, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think what's going on in the Philippines leads us to that emotional depth. I have pictures here of pre-typhoon Philippines. See how beautiful it is and serene? A place anybody would want to visit. And then Typhoon Haiyan struck. And the area was absolutely devastated. The winds were 196 miles an hour before the gusts. It was one of the greatest, most powerful storms ever documented to make landfall. It surprised everyone with its force. Thousands are dead. Millions are misplaced. Such destruction is hard for us to even begin to imagine. Now, Jesus, in Luke's gospel, is talking about a destruction that is yet to come in Israel and in Jerusalem. Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple, this beautiful, adorned building that was rebuilt. This is a model of what the temple looked like in 70 AD after it was rebuilt in the time of Herod. The temple had been built originally way before this and destroyed in 587 BC, and then rebuilt, and this is the beauty. You can see how beautifully it's adorned with gold and all sorts of carvings and everything. And at this point in this scripture passage, they're pointing to this temple and saying, isn't this beautiful? And Jesus is saying, oh, guess what? That's going to be destroyed. Jesus is saying, this is finite, but it's going to be destroyed. It's going to go away. Now, this is what happened. This is an artistic rendering of the plundering of Rome on Jerusalem and the destruction and burning and fire and everything of this beautiful temple. This is a picture of what the temple looks like today, and this one shows you where the old temple used to be. If you were to go to Jerusalem today, this is the ruins. And then this is the ruins, and this is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem as it looks today. So this is what has come out of all of that destruction and that ruin. So Jesus really is saying, don't get focused on the things that look so permanent, because they're not as permanent as you think they are. That word, that apocalypse, You know, I named my sermon well before I write them, and I probably wouldn't have named it Apocalypse now, but since I said that, I think I need to tie it together. But apocalypse really means destruction. It means the end of. It means it's a prophetic revelation of a time when everything will come to an end and something new will happen. And it's very interesting to me to think, however, that Jesus was not really talking about a physical destruction. We have looked at pictures of all physical stuff, physical destruction. That sets well in our minds. We can wrap our mind around that. But when we're reading this gospel lesson, we need to remember that Jesus is talking about the physical destruction in hindsight. The gospel wasn't written until after the temple was destroyed. So they have Jesus predicting the destruction of this temple as if this is a wonderful prophetic word, and I don't even think that's really what Jesus was talking about. I think Jesus was saying, you know, life has its crisis moments. Things will get bad in life. There will be destruction. There will be times that feel like destruction. There will be times when we just feel like our life is breaking apart, the same way the temple broke apart under the Roman conquest, the same way the Philippines was blown away by the power of Haiyan. And what we miss when we focus on this temporal, finite stuff is we miss the real meat of the message, which comes in verse 15, where Jesus says, you know, all this stuff is going to happen, but it's not disaster for you. It's an opportunity. It's not disaster. It's an opportunity. Verse 15, I will give you words and wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. He says, this is the very time for you to be testifying to God and what God has done in this world and done for you. You know, I find that just amazing that when things seem worst in the life of a person of faith, that is not the time we are supposed to succumb and be destroyed. That is the time when we are supposed to testify to God and God's presence, to give witness to how very present God is in our lives, to trust that Jesus and all of his teachings have put this into our hearts and our minds, and the words will just flow. That we're here today the way we are here today because of the love of God. And that whatever is happening around us, we trust. We're moving forward because we trust. We trust that God is with us. Powerful words for people at Pompton Valley right now. Powerful words for me. Powerful words for any Christian, because disaster is a part of life. Disasters come. Parents die, children run away from home, disaster hits, houses are burned down, Hurricane Sandy hits in the United States. Disaster happens. But the good news that Jesus Christ brings to us that we forget the most often, and we cannot forget it, is that we are not abandoned in that disaster. We are to use that disaster as a moment to remember and to trust and to hold on to hope and to have faith in a way that we've never had faith before. Now, this week in one of my commentaries, I found a story that just resonated so deeply with me. It was something, the minute I read it, I knew I wanted to share it with you, because it's a story that lifts up how we go about having this hope and this faith in disastrous times. And it's a story about a Christian and a hymn writer named Thomas Dorsey. He was born in rural Georgia in 1889. He was a songwriter and a gospel and a blues musician, very well known in his field. And he moved to Chicago, had a family, and was working in both the church and in the bars, because he could do blues, you know, and he could do the gospel music. So he was doing both. But his commitment to serve God was so deep that he decided to put aside the bars and the lounges and not do that work and focus all of his work on the church. And in 1932, he was called to be one of the key figures at a revival down in St. Louis, Missouri, which is right on the edge of Illinois. And he left a pregnant wife back in Chicago, made his way down to St. Louis, and he wasn't there one night before he got a telegram that said, "Your wife just died." This is 1932. The best and fastest way to be in touch was telegram. "Your wife just died." He dropped everything, drove home, and I know the trip from St. Louis to Chicago very well. And in 1932, the roads weren't very good. It must have taken him a long time to get there. And what he discovered was that his wife had died in childbirth. And the day after he got there, his baby boy died as well. And he retreated into a painful silence. And after a long while, he finally came out of his silent time and was able to tell people how one day, in his pain, in his destruction, in the deepest, darkest, most painful time in his life, he sat in front of a keyboard, and the words and the music just came to him. And what he created in that moment was the hymn called "Precious Lord." And these are the words of that hymn. It says, "Precious Lord, take my hand. Lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home." If I would have entitled my sermon after I wrote it, I would call this sermon, "Take My Hand." Friends, at this really difficult time, may each one of us trust God to take our hand and to lead us to wherever we need to go together. And let all God's people say, Amen. Let's take a moment to think about what we've just done.